You must remember that in 1991, the US bases left and nawala yung ating defense shield. And from 1991 onwards, our Congress should have provided the funds. No? Unfortunately, since we were reeling from the effects of all of the man-made and natural disasters, the little budget that we had to go to social services like education, health, etc. Very little went to defense. Wala tayong pera talaga for defense. At doon nakita ng China yung butas. Wala na yung kano at wala naman tayong investment sa ating defense. Kinuha nila yung mischief reef.
We have no radars. We have no surveillance capability. We have no ocean-going ships. We have an air force that has limited capability to monitor. And our ships cannot go to the West Philippine Sea in these areas during monsoon season because of the rough seas and the high waves. So when an Air Force pilot saw this makeshift structure on Mischief Reef in February of 1995, that was a wake-up call for the Philippines. Because of that, the Philippines decided to negotiate Visiting Forces Agreement with the Americans to allow the Americans to come back. Of course, the Philippines at that time cannot challenge China because China has a bigger armed forces.
But before they got Mischief Reef, there was already a lot of fighting behind the scenes na hindi alam ng taong bayan. They would put up markers, we would blow up the markers, ganon, no? One time, under the cover of darkness, and when we were not around, because we lacked ships, they got Mischief Reef. And we knew already why, because at that time, pinag-usapan na nila yung 9-dash line. So we knew already their long-term intent, no? To be the next superpower. And they said, no, don't worry. We're just putting up shelters there for our fishermen. Of course, we didn't believe them. And sure enough, today, Mischief Reef is a full-blown forward operating base. And then subsequently, in order to assert their control over the South China Sea, they put up also Subi Reef and Fiery Cross, but they're outside our EEZ, sa labas, to say that the South China Sea is under them, under their jurisdiction. So everything's all make-believe, and that's where we are today.
What Ramos did was to gather a coalition, not only in the country, but he enlisted the support of ASEAN to resist the Chinese aggressive and assertive behavior in the South China Sea. Because the Mischief Reef is just one incident, but the Chinese activities were increasing that other Asian countries, ASEAN countries, are getting concerned, especially Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Singapore.
When Mischief Reef happened, in 2 months, President Ramos was able to get Speaker of the House, Joe De Venecia, pass the first AFP Modernization Act. And then it was concurred by the Senate in 2 short months. And the whole idea was to raise funds to quickly modernize the AFP. So as they were setting up, ensuring that Fort Bonifacio was ready for sale to the private sector,
Congress also passed a modernization bill. It's a 150 billion fund to modernize the armed forces, although initially Congress only gave 50 billion seed money for the military to buy new aircraft, new ships to modernize and build modest, credible defense posture. So Ramos did a lot of things, diplomatically, militarily, and politically, also by engaging with China. He invited President Jiang Zemin to Manila for a meeting, and he started actually the cooperation with China. During his period, I remember the Press Secretary Renato de Villa going to Beijing to sign an agreement with China for defense cooperation. And China, as a token gift, gave the Philippines a lot of engineering equipment for our military.
FVR is a soldier. And you know, because they've experienced war, they're the first ones to really push for peace. That explains his motivation in trying to forge this peace pact with Miswari and the Moro National Liberation Front, despite strong and very strong opposition from Christian communities in the South. That was his biggest stumbling block. To be fair to Fidel V. Ramos, it was a genuine interest in solving the Mindanao problem, the rebellion, the Muslim insurgency in Mindanao.
I think Ramos was aided very much by foreign-friendly powers like Saudi Arabia, Libya, and other Muslim countries, which convinced Ms. Wari to take the autonomy line. And I think President also offered Nur Miswari the position of running the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. So, an experiment of how the MNLF would govern the Muslim provinces. So, I think they were able to successfully convince the MNLF that why not try running the autonomous region. And perhaps it was a better idea that the other countries, not only Muslim countries, but the US, Japan also chipped in and helped a lot, especially in developing the region.
When I took over as Secretary of Interior and Local Government, I took over that extra job of his. He made me the Cabinet Officer in charge of ARMM. So together, we worked to get Nur Miswari, who was the head of the MNLF, and that's where the Muslim rebellion really started, from the MNLF. We got him to talk to us, and eventually he signed up in 1996. In the case of the MNLF, originally they wanted to separate, but eventually they agreed that the better way would be a political compromise, a peace settlement. They had no intention of taking over the government, but the CPP, NPA, NDF, to this day, harbor that desire. Kaya't walang meeting of the minds pagdating sa peace. I've gone through a number of ceasefires during my time because internal security was my concern. And each time the ceasefire was broken. The ceasefire was only used to regroup, to rearm, to redeploy, and then to continue again their atrocities.
At the height of President Marcos until Cory Aquino, the number of NPA was estimated to be 25,000. But Fidel Ramos was able to bring it down to around 5,000 by 1995. And I think the main reason are threefold. One is the economy improved. Two, there was peace talks with CPP, NPA, NDF. And number three, he repealed that sedition law, which was used by Ferdinand Marcos during his period to crack down and jail and torture a lot of suspected dissidents.
Crime was riding a high wave during those years. Kidnappings, bank robberies, palitan lang yan eh.
So I think that was one of the consideration why President Ramos appointed Estrada to head the Presidential Anti-Crime Commission. Perhaps he was more at home with the police because he was a former mayor. And as a former mayor, he has an experience in running the law enforcement side.
You have to give it to Fidel Ramos that he gave his vice president, who belongs to another party, a job, and a very important job at that. ERAP had very competent people under him running the PACC operations. So one of them was now Senator Panfilo Lacson.
And I'll tell you a very funny story because after the president offered him that, sabi ni Vice President ERAP, Mr. President, I will think about it. Please give me time to think about it. Okay, sabi, very gracious naman si President Ramos. Sabi niya, please do. But don't take too long, okay? Bah, 1 week before the oath-taking, hindi pa sumasagot si Vice President ERAP. So I was tasked by President Ramos to call him up. Please find out how come it's taking too long. So tinawagan ko naman si Vice President ERAP. So sabi ko, ERAP, hindi mo pa sinasagot si President-elect. Ano ba nangyayari? Sabi niya, pinag-iisipan ko pa eh. Ay, bakit? Sabi mo kay Presidente Eddie, crime does not pay. So, sinabi ko kay Presidente Ramos, tawanan kami lahat. Pero sabi ni Presidente Ramos, alam ko nang ibig niyang sabihin. Tatanggapin niya kung meron siyang budget. So sure enough, that was the coded message of Vice President Erap to tell President Ramos in a very nice way, "Sir, I will accept the job, pero useless naman ako kung walang budget."
Upholding democracy, I think, is the legacy of Fidel Ramos. He was a military officer, and for many times he was tempted to grab power. But in fact, he defended Cory Aquino, and he prevented segments in the military to seize control of political power.